Have you ever had that unsettling moment when you looked in the mirror and felt like you were staring at a complete stranger? Not just physically, but something deeper, more profound. A moment when you questioned everything you thought you knew about yourself, as if the person you've been presenting to the world and even to yourself was nothing more than an elaborate costume you've been wearing for years without realizing it. Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist who revolutionized our understanding of the human psyche, believed that most people go through their entire lives without ever truly meeting themselves. He argued that what we call our identity is often just a collection of masks, roles, and expectations we've unconsciously adopted to survive in society. Jung called this false self the persona, and suggested that behind it lies our authentic self, waiting to be discovered. But here's the disturbing truth Jung uncovered through decades of research into the depths of human consciousness. The day you realize you don't know who you really are isn't a crisis, it's an awakening. It's the first crack in the shell of illusion that has kept you imprisoned in a life that was never truly yours. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey through the 7 unmistakable signs that reveal you've been living as a stranger to yourself. We'll explore the psychological mechanisms that create this self-deception, the profound consequences of remaining unconscious to your true nature, and most importantly, how this moment of realization becomes the gateway to what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you were always meant to be. By the end of this exploration, you'll understand why this moment of not knowing yourself is actually the beginning of true self-knowledge, and how embracing this uncertainty can transform your life in ways you never imagined possible. The first sign that you don't know who you really are manifests in what Jung called the uncomfortable silence. Picture this: you're alone in your room, no distractions, no phone, no background noise, just you and the quietness. Within minutes, you feel an almost unbearable urge to fill that silence with something, anything. You reach for your phone, turn on music, call someone, or suddenly remember an urgent task that needs immediate attention. This compulsive need to avoid solitude isn't just preference, it's a defense mechanism. Jung discovered that when we're forced into genuine solitude, we begin to hear voices from our unconscious that we've been drowning out with constant activity and stimulation. These voices carry uncomfortable truths about who we really are beneath our carefully constructed personas. The person you believe yourself to be cannot withstand extended periods of silence because that constructed self requires constant external validation and reinforcement to maintain its existence. Your true self, however, thrives in silence. It's where authentic thoughts, feelings, and insights emerge naturally without the filter of social expectation or learned behavior. When you can't tolerate being alone with yourself, you're essentially admitting that you're afraid of what you might discover in that silence. You're acknowledging, perhaps unconsciously, that the person you think you are might not be the person you actually are. The second sign reveals itself through what I call the mirror of others. Have you ever noticed how certain types of people trigger intense reactions in you? Not just mild annoyance, but deep, visceral responses that seem disproportionate to the situation. Jung identified this phenomenon as projection, one of the most revealing aspects of our unconscious psychology. What we can't stand in others is often what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. The arrogant person who infuriates you might be reflecting your own hidden pride. The victim mentality you despise in others could be highlighting your own tendency to avoid responsibility. The person whose confidence intimidates you might be showing you the power you're afraid to own. Jung explained that we project our disowned parts onto others because it's psychologically easier to see these qualities out there than to recognize them within ourselves. This projection serves as a protective mechanism, allowing us to maintain our idealized self-image while unconsciously expressing the parts of ourselves we've deemed unacceptable. But here's the profound insight. These projections are actually gifts. They're your unconscious mind's way of showing you the aspects of yourself that you've split off and denied. When you find yourself having strong emotional reactions to others, especially negative ones, you're being given a roadmap to your own shadow, those parts of your personality that you've pushed into the darkness of your unconscious. The third sign appears in the phenomenon Jung called the life you didn't choose. Look around at your current circumstances, your job, your relationships, your living situation, your daily routines. How much of this life feels like it emerged from your authentic desires versus external expectations, family pressure, or societal conditioning? Many people reach midlife and suddenly realize they've been living someone else's dream, following a script written by parents, culture, or circumstances rather than their own deep calling. This isn't just about career choices. It extends to fundamental aspects of identity like values, beliefs, and even personality traits. Jung observed that we often unconsciously adopt the hopes, fears, and expectations of our family system and broader culture. We become who we think we should be, rather than who we actually are. This process happens so gradually and completely that we mistake these borrowed identities for our authentic selves. The tragedy isn't just that you're living the wrong life, it's that your real life, the one aligned with your true nature, remains unlived. Jung called this the unlived life, and considered it one of the greatest sources of psychological suffering. When you're disconnected from your authentic self, every achievement feels hollow, every relationship feels superficial, and every day feels like you're acting in a play where you've forgotten you're just playing a role. The fourth sign manifests in what Jung termed the contradiction crisis. You begin to notice that your thoughts, feelings, and actions don't align in a coherent way. You say you value honesty, but find yourself constantly editing your truth to avoid conflict. You claim to prioritize health while consistently making choices that undermine your well-being. You speak about wanting deep connections while keeping everyone at arm's length. These contradictions aren't character flaws. They're evidence of internal fragmentation. When you don't know who you really are, different parts of your psyche operate independently, often in direct opposition to each other. Jung called these autonomous fragments complexes, and they can literally take over your consciousness, making decisions and driving behaviors that your conscious self doesn't understand or approve of. This internal contradiction creates a persistent sense of inauthenticity that you can't quite name. You feel like you're constantly betraying yourself, but you can't identify what you're betraying or why. This is because your conscious ego, the part of you that thinks it's in charge, is actually just one player in a much larger psychological drama where unconscious forces are pulling the strings. The recognition of these contradictions is crucial because it signals that your unconscious is no longer content to remain hidden. The parts of yourself that you've denied or ignored are beginning to assert themselves, creating the internal conflict that forces you to question the coherence of your identity. The fifth sign emerges through what I call the decision paralysis. When you don't know who you really are, making authentic decisions becomes nearly impossible. You find yourself constantly second-guessing your choices, seeking external validation for major life decisions, or becoming overwhelmed by relatively simple options. This paralysis occurs because authentic decision-making requires access to your true values, desires, and intuitive knowing. When you're disconnected from your authentic self, you lose access to your internal compass. Instead of deciding from a place of inner clarity, you try to analyze every choice from the perspective of what others might think, what seems most practical, or what promises the least conflict. Jung understood that our deepest wisdom comes not from rational analysis, but from what he called the transcendent function. the bridge between conscious and unconscious knowing. When you're cut off from your authentic self, you're also cut off from this deeper wisdom, leaving you with only the limited perspective of your conscious ego to navigate complex life situations. The inability to make decisions authentically isn't just inconvenient, it's a sign that you've lost connection with your own authority. You're looking outside yourself for answers that can only be found within, seeking permission from others for choices that only you can make. Before we continue exploring the final two signs, I want to take a moment to acknowledge how challenging this recognition can be. Realizing that you don't know who you really are isn't just an intellectual insight, it's a profound existential crisis that can shake the very foundation of your identity. But I want you to understand something important. This crisis is not your enemy, it's your invitation to freedom. If this exploration is resonating with you, if you're recognizing these signs in your own life, I encourage you to stay with this process. The journey we're on together isn't just about identifying a problem, it's about understanding the solution that lies hidden within the problem itself. Consider subscribing to this channel if you're ready to dive deeper into these transformative insights, and leave a comment sharing which of these signs you recognize in your own experience. Your courage to face these uncomfortable truths is already the beginning of your transformation. The sixth sign reveals itself through the energy drain phenomenon. When you're living disconnected from your authentic self, everything requires enormous effort. Simple social interactions leave you exhausted. Work that should be engaging feels like drudgery. Even activities you thought you enjoyed feel forced and depleting. This chronic fatigue isn't physical, it's psychic. Jung discovered that when we're constantly maintaining a false persona, we're essentially running two psychological programs simultaneously: the authentic self trying to emerge and the false self trying to maintain control. This internal conflict consumes vast amounts of psychological energy, leaving you feeling perpetually tired despite not having done anything particularly challenging. Think of it like trying to swim upstream against a powerful current. You can do it for a while, but it requires constant effort and eventually becomes unsustainable. When you're living authentically, aligned with your true nature, life flows more naturally. Challenges still exist, but you're working with your natural current rather than against it. The energy drain also manifests in relationships. When you don't know who you really are, you attract people who relate to your false persona rather than your authentic self. Maintaining these relationships requires constant performance, constant editing of your truth, constant suppression of your real thoughts and feelings. These relationships, no matter how long they've lasted, never quite feel nourishing because they're based on a fundamental deception about who you are. The seventh and most profound sign is what Jung called the call from the unconscious. This manifests as a growing sense that there's something more to life, something you're missing, something calling to you from beyond the boundaries of your current existence. You might experience this as recurring dreams with symbolic content, synchronicities that seem too meaningful to be coincidental, or a persistent feeling that you're meant for something different than your current circumstances. Jung believed that the unconscious actively seeks consciousness, that there's an inherent drive within the psyche toward wholeness and integration. When you've been living disconnected from your authentic self for an extended period, this drive intensifies. Your unconscious begins sending increasingly strong signals designed to wake you up to your true nature. These signals often feel disturbing because they threaten the stability of your current identity. You might find yourself questioning fundamental beliefs you've held for years, feeling drawn to activities or people that don't fit your established patterns, or experiencing sudden insights that challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself. This call from the unconscious isn't random, it's intelligent and purposeful. Your psyche is literally trying to guide you toward your authentic self, toward what Jung called your true vocation or calling. But to hear this call clearly, you must first acknowledge that the person you think you are might not be the person you're meant to become. Now comes the revelation that transforms this entire exploration from a crisis into an opportunity. The day you realize you don't know who you really are isn't the end of something. It's the beginning of everything. Jung called this moment the call to individuation, the psychological imperative to become your authentic self. Here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. The self you don't know isn't absent, it's hidden. It's been there all along, beneath the layers of conditioning, expectation, and unconscious identification. The process of not knowing who you are is actually the first step in a profound psychological journey that leads to knowing yourself more deeply than you ever imagined possible. Jung identified several stages in this journey of authentic self-discovery. First comes the dissolution of the false persona, the recognition that who you thought you were was largely a construction. This phase is disorienting and can feel like psychological death, but it's necessary to make space for your authentic self to emerge. Next comes what Jung called the encounter with the shadow, facing and integrating the aspects of yourself that you've denied or suppressed. This isn't about becoming these rejected qualities, but about acknowledging them as part of your complete humanity and learning to channel their energy constructively. Then comes the integration of what Jung called the anima in men, or animus in women, the contrasexual aspects of the psyche that balance and complete your conscious personality. This process involves developing qualities and capacities that your conditioning may have taught you to reject as inappropriate for your gender or role. Finally comes the emergence of what Jung called the self, with a capital S, the authentic organizing principle of your psyche that transcends ego identification and connects you to something larger than your personal story. This isn't a destination, but an ongoing process of becoming more fully who you were always meant to be. But here's the crucial insight that most people miss. This journey doesn't require you to become someone new. It requires you to stop being someone you never were. Your authentic self isn't something you need to create. It's something you need to uncover, like a sculptor revealing the statue that was always hidden within the stone. The process of individuation, of becoming authentically yourself, brings profound changes to every aspect of your life. Relationships that were based on false connection either transform into deeper intimacy or naturally dissolve. Work that felt draining either becomes energizing as you bring your authentic self to it, or you find yourself drawn toward activities that align with your true nature. Your relationship with solitude transforms completely. Instead of being something to avoid, silence becomes a sanctuary where you can connect with your deeper wisdom. Decision-making becomes more natural as you develop trust in your internal guidance system. The exhausting effort of maintaining a false persona is replaced by the natural energy that flows when you're aligned with your authentic self. Most importantly, you develop what Jung called a sense of destiny, a feeling that your life has unique meaning and purpose that only you can fulfill. This isn't grandiose thinking, it's the recognition that your authentic self has something specific to contribute to the world, something that can only emerge through your particular combination of experiences, talents, and perspectives. The day you realize you don't know who you really are is actually the day you begin to remember. Beneath all the conditioning, beyond all the roles and expectations, there exists a core self that has been waiting patiently for recognition. This self carries your deepest wisdom, your most authentic desires, and your unique contribution to the human story. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming authentically yourself, is not just a personal journey, but a contribution to the collective consciousness of humanity. When you live authentically, you give others permission to do the same. Your courage to face the unknown aspects of yourself becomes an inspiration for others to embark on their own journey of self-discovery. The signs we've explored today, the uncomfortable recognition that you don't know who you really are, aren't symptoms of failure or inadequacy. They're evidence that your authentic self is strong enough to challenge the false structures that have been containing it. They're proof that something within you refuses to settle for a life that isn't truly yours. As we conclude this exploration, I want to leave you with a question that Jung often posed to his patients. What if, instead of asking yourself who you think you should be, you asked yourself who you cannot help but be? What if you stopped trying to become the person you think you're supposed to be and instead allowed yourself to discover the person you've always been beneath the surface? The journey from not knowing who you are to knowing yourself authentically isn't easy, but it's the most important work you can do in this lifetime. It requires courage to face uncertainty, patience to allow the process to unfold naturally, and faith that your authentic self is worth the effort of discovery. Your authentic self is not waiting somewhere in the future to be achieved. It's present right now, beneath the layers of conditioning and false identification. The day you realize you don't know who you really are is the day you begin the most important conversation of your life, the conversation with the person you've always been but never had the courage to meet. This is your invitation to begin that conversation. This is your call to the most profound adventure possible, the journey home to yourself.